The Tennessee Vols are headed to Dallas for SEC Media Days. Well, some of the Vols are headed for Dallas. Nico Iamaleava will not be among the Vols we will hear from in Dallas. Josh Heupel will be there along with 3 Tennessee players. Nico, being the redshirt freshman, was not among those we will hear from in Dallas. So, got to wait until preseason media days in Knoxville to hear more from Tennessee's quarterback. Welcome into the Volunteer State. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside the Knoxville News Sentinels, Adam Sparks and John Adams on this Media Day edition of the pod. So, guys, let's start with the Nico situation. Well, it's a situation, but it's the roster of guys who will be going to media days. I don't think it escalates to the level of situation, but I'm curious for both your thoughts. John, I know you had a column. Adam, you had a story as well. I mean, Nico Mania is so big. Normally, like, you don't spend any time, for the most part, I know I didn't really spending much time thinking about who's going to media days, who's not. It's like whoever's there, I'll talk to him. It's not that big a deal, But with Nico, so much hoopla has surrounded him since he signed with Tennessee as a 5-star commitment. Of course, then he has the big performance in his first career start, going back to the bowl game against Iowa. I'm not surprised that he's not among the representatives there because he only has 1 start in his career because he's a redshirt freshman. But what is your guys' take on the fact that there'll be 3 Tennessee guys there, but the quarterback won't be one of them?
Yeah, this certainly isn't a surprise of anybody that covers the team. We were discussing things within the beat, the reporters around the team, probably like 3 or 4 months ago, back in spring practice, of who would be the 3 players that would go. It was most likely going to be Omari Thomas, which it was. Omari went last year, but he's also the SEC player rep to the NCAA. So he kind of had to go. Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, loves to do this in his State of the Conference address that opens things up. He likes to reference players as like the future of college football or whatever, and he likes to reference like these guys that are representing the conference, like the smartest kids. That's what he likes to do. Omari Thomas would be a guy that he's probably going to mention in his State of the Conference address. So Omari was going to go. Cooper Mays was always going to go. He's earned it. He's a center of the 3 guys going. He's the best interview. He's probably got the most press conference experience of anybody, so he'll be completely comfortable. He's pretty quotable, too, for an offensive lineman. Those guys are usually intentionally boring. Cooper Mays is not. So it's really the 3rd guy we were wondering. Keenan Peely, the middle linebacker, is going, who's barely played. He's a team leader and all that, even though he hasn't played. He's played less than Nico has, at least at Tennessee. But he's 26 years old. He'll handle himself well. He's a captain. But we thought the 3rd guy, maybe Brew McCoy, who's coming off an injury, veteran wide receiver. We thought maybe it'd be Dylan Sampson, starting running back, a very good quote. But I never thought it was going to be Nico. I mean, what Josh Heupel is doing with this is making his representation as boring as possible. I mean, this is the Josh Heupel playbook. Say a lot, but say nothing. Say a lot of words, but have no meaning at all from them. Be as boring as possible, as bland as possible. He likes what he does on the field to do the talking, and that's what he hopes the talk around Tennessee football is, that they'll be talking about Nico and James Pierce, who would have been another obvious one to go, that they'll be talking about them in week 2, in week 4, in week 6, when there's actually football on the field. He doesn't want anybody talking about his team in the preseason. And so he's bringing some of the more boring guys, linemen and a linebacker, and that's the way he likes it. If he can leave Dallas with nobody really saying much about Tennessee, he'll be perfectly happy.
John, that's going to be music to a columnist's ears, huh? Let's not make any news, be boring, and just get in and out without making many headlines, huh?
Well, I wrote in my column yesterday after Adams broke the news of the 3 player representatives from Tennessee. I wrote that SEC Media Days has always been a misnomer. It's the SEC Coaching Days. The coaches dominate the scene. They're the stars of the show. because they not only attend, they also have the ultimate decision as to which player represents the school. Media relations people will have input, but the coach is going to decide it. And I used an old quote. I can remember this is back in 1992 media days when the Curly Hallman, the legendary coach of LSU football, I'm being sarcastic, was in his second year. He was attending his second media days. And he said, boy, said, I learned my lesson last year. He said, I'm not going to bring some big talker to SEC media days. The previous year, he'd had Todd Kinchin, a really good wide receiver, played about 6-7 years in the NFL, I think, and was very loquacious. He was good quote, didn't back away from any question, talked about a lot of things, insightful, everything a media person would want, and nothing a coach cared anything about. Well, Curly, so he basically wanted to bring, somebody up there with not a gag order, but I think Adam hit on it. You want guys that can be articulate. It's kind of a nifty, almost political skill. Be articulate, but don't say anything.
Omari Thomas.
Good.
Omari Thomas fits that perfectly. By the way, he's a journalism major. So
so he can have he can have a great presentation, but there's absolutely no substance.
Well, I think you just hit on it, John. Like this event is called SEC Media Days, but it's not really for the media. I mean, first and foremost, I think it's for the SEC network at this stage, but they televise the coaches' interviews. They don't televise the player interviews. They televise the coaches at the podium. And as you said, John, the coaches are the star of the show, and the media are props in the show. Media sit in the ballroom and ask some questions and serve as sort of the extras so that this television show, the SEC network, can go on. I remember one year between the SEC's 14 teams at that time, there were like 3 punters selected to go to media days. And you think, well, I guarantee you they didn't ask the media who we wanted to hear from at this event, because there's no way we would have had 3 punters on hand for it. But that's just kind of the way it goes. It's like Adam was saying. You don't want to stir up a lot of drama. You don't necessarily want the star quarterback there. There are going to be a lot of quarterbacks at this event, but Nico being the redshirt freshman, I think that's sort of what tips the scales away from him being one of the guys there.
Well, and to let people know sort of what coaches fear, it's that you don't want drama. You don't want, there's a ton of media at these things, and there's like primary media, but there's a lot of secondary, tertiary media, so to speak. There's media that cover the team that they cover. They're going to media days to sort of get something inflammatory from an opponent. They're sort of servicing their audience in that way. So imagine if we get to choose who goes to media day. We would probably choose Nico. We would choose James Pierce, likely first-round pick, and we would choose Dylan Sampson. That'd probably be the 3 that I would pick. Dylan Sampson would probably say something very flamboyant. He would say he's the best running back in the SEC. It would get a lot of attention, not the kind of attention that Josh Heupel wants. He's a very confident guy, and he will say what's on his mind. We love that. Coaches don't. James Pierce is not comfortable in front of the media. He just isn't. They're going to get him there eventually. He'll be there at UT's local media day. We'll get him throughout the year. He's going to be a first-round pick next year, so he's got to get used to it. But he would be swarmed at SEC media day. There'd be 50, 100 reporters around him, yelling questions at him. And he's not comfortable in front of media. He did the press conference after the Citrus Bowl, had to ask a couple times for people to repeat the question. He thought a long time and then would only give like very short answers. I could see James Pierce trying to please a reporter and would say something accidentally braggadocious, if that makes sense, and something that could be taken out of context easily. Nico would be asked about being the Well, Nico would be asked about being the $8 million man.
Mm-hmm.
He would be asked about his NIL deal. But ask him about that, don't get an answer. We've reported on a million times, but other media coming to Nico, that's the nugget that they need to get from him. And, without him playing much, but having that price tag on his name, there would only be bad things that would come out of it. So those three are the three that I would request. All three of them would go poorly, I think, in Josh Heupel's eyes for one reason or another.
And go ahead, John.
Well, I was just thinking when Adam was saying that, and you know how it works too, Blake. This is not an easy interview for even an experienced interviewee, because as Adam points out, the players you have a covey of sports writer media types surrounding him, and one person might ask him about his NIL deal. The very next question might come about his 40 time, or in the case of punters, their hang time. And so, I mean, it's hard to follow it. If put yourself in their place, there often aren't follow-ups. It's not as though you're talking on a subject. You're getting one about your like Nico, family background, where you're from, how did you get to Tennessee, why'd you pick Tennessee's offense, are you afraid you haven't gained enough weight, that you're not thick enough to withstand SEC punch? They're just coming from every angle, and you're looking around trying to say, now who asked that, trying to maybe make eye contact with the question. So it really is like a worst case interviews situation.
Case in point, Joe Milton at SEC Media Days last year, we get like 12 minutes with him or something where there's a throng of reporters around him. At one point in his appearance, people were asking him about his arm, strongest arm in college football. And he bragged about that a little bit. Said, yeah, I've got the strongest arm in college football. How far can you throw it, Joe? Oh, I can throw it 80 yards. Who knows? Maybe 85 yards. And then you fast forward like 7-8 minutes later, and he's asked about his arm strength like the 11th time. And he says, I don't want to be known just for my arm strength. I'm a complete quarterback. I read the field. I can run. I want to be accurate in short yardage. And so the first reporter took away all that Joe Milton was talking about is I have the strongest arm in college football. The reporter 7 minutes away's takeaway was this guy's done talking about his arm strength. All he wanted to say at SEC Media Days was how he's a complete quarterback. He doesn't want to be known as a strong-armed gimmick. And so you can get those different, things, and you have to be patient, and you have to just sort of answer questions really in the same way over and over and over, because you're going to get so many different narratives out of it. And that's why I come back to Nico this time. A lot of things to be construed in 100 different ways of what he says. James Pierce, being experienced with the media at all, could really get into a pickle if he said the wrong thing one time.
Adam, you mentioned not a lot of news probably will come out of this event. That's just the way it is. In so much as there is news, it comes on the last day of this when the predicted order of finish votes are due, and then we learn where all the media that covered this event think the teams in the conference will finish in the standings. Now, it's different this year because no more divisions, right? So I think that could lead to a little more interesting voting. I think over the years when you have divisions, 6 on each side or then 7 on each side, you could sort of predict within about one spot where each team was going to go in the division standings. Without divisions, I think that makes for a little bit more interesting of a vote. And as it pertains to Tennessee, I think there's a pretty good range of where the Vols could end up in this predicted order of finish, because I think they sort of get lumped in there with a number of teams that could finish anywhere from, say, like 8-4 to 10-2, maybe even 11-1. And there are a handful of teams in that camp. So I'll start, and then we'll go kind of around the horn here, where we would pick Tennessee in our predicted finish, and then where we think they will wind up in the media's predicted finish. So I would have Tennessee. Oh boy, I'm going to say I would have Tennessee 6th or 7th. I have the Vols at 9-3. I have them losing to subject to change. Ask me next week, may change my mind. But in this moment, I have them losing to Georgia, Alabama, and Oklahoma. That road game at Oklahoma, I think, is one that's overlooked on this schedule. Tennessee has struggled on the road in a game the past couple of seasons. Got trounced by Missouri last year, lost at South Carolina the year before that. I think that's one that's kind of being overlooked maybe by the common fan on the schedule. You zero in on Georgia and Alabama, you overlook Oklahoma a little bit, but I think that's going to be a toughie. So I got them at about 9-3, which I think puts them about 6th or 7th in the conference. Where will the media have them? Well, I think in the top 5, you're going to have Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss, Alabama. What does the media do with LSU? I think is a question. I think the media will have them 6th, although I could see them being up at number 5 in the finish. So I would have them about 6, and I think that's where they're going to wind up as well in this vote.
I would have Tennessee about 4th. I think Georgia, Texas. I would have LSU. I think if you look at LSU's schedule, it's favorable. I think their record is going to be better than probably what the product is. And then I would have Tennessee after them. I think Tennessee is probably going to be the top of the second tier. Like that second tier is Tennessee, Ole Miss, Alabama, Missouri. By the way, Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Missouri, none of those teams play each other, which will make it interesting if it ended up like that, like how the playoff would judge those teams. Where Tennessee will get picked, they won't get picked as high as I would have them at 4th, probably 6th or 7th. I think, Texas and Georgia will be ahead of them. I think LSU will be picked ahead of them, probably Ole Miss. Alabama, because of the brand, will be picked ahead of Tennessee. But I'm picking Tennessee ahead of Alabama, though. I've got so right now I would say Tennessee is 9-3, like you. It's harder for me to get to 9-3, though. I say 9-3 because I think they'll lose to Georgia. They'll lose to either Alabama or Oklahoma. They'll go 1-1 in those two. So that's 2 losses. And then the way that I've usually picked these are that they'll have a game they should win that they'll lose. Last year that was Missouri. 2 years ago that was South Carolina. So I think they'll lose a 3rd game to somebody. The problem with that is when I go game to game, there just aren't many of those toss-up opponents right now on Tennessee's schedule that I see. Florida's down. I think they'll beat Kentucky. Tennessee has Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Vanderbilt on their schedule. Those are probably the 3 worst teams in the conference from a preseason perspective. So it's sort of like high-end opponent, low-end opponent, and sort of not much in between. So if I'm picking it game by game, I think Tennessee is 10-2. But if I'm looking at it from an overall standpoint, I would say they're about a 9-3 team. And I think they'll finish higher than they'll be picked because I don't think their brand is quite to the 10-win precipice that maybe they could play to. I also think Texas and Oklahoma coming in, Texas will get a lot of respect in the preseason poll. I think that will be a tip of the hat from SEC writers saying, Texas, you absolutely belong. We salute you. You're as good as any team could be in this conference. I think I'll be interested to see how people gauge Oklahoma because this will be mostly SEC media, like media that's covered the SEC for many years. And if those media are like me, I think I look at Oklahoma and say that may have been a almost playoff team the past few years. I think they're a middle of the pack SEC team last year. I think Oklahoma is going to be like 10th or 11th in the conference this year. And I'll be interested to see
news.
Yeah, they could beat Tennessee and I think still go 3-5 in the conference. Look at their schedule; it is brutal. Oklahoma was given no favors. They have tough road games. Their home opponents are difficult. Oklahoma will finish in the bottom half, maybe the bottom third, I think, of the conference.
That would not be a good time to be Brent Venables.
No, Adam just fired Brent Venables. Just fired him right here on a podcast. He's gone.
Which is weird because Venables just got a contract extension like a week ago.
I don't care. He's gone now. If Adam's right, he's done. I mean, stick a fork in him. I agree with Adam on a couple of points. So I don't agree with Oklahoma being that bad, but on Tennessee, I have Tennessee fourth. Now I have Ole Miss. We talked about this on SEC Unfiltered. Blake and I did. I have Ole Miss second behind Georgia, then Texas, then Tennessee, and Alabama is my big five. But here's what I think the media will do. I think it will have Georgia. Georgia, back-to-back national titles, didn't make the playoff last year, but I think most people looked at Georgia. Well, who's really the best team? And I think they would say Georgia. They had a couple of key players not at 100% when they lost to Alabama. But so Georgia, Texas, I think you're going to have a strong Texas media contingent there with it being in Dallas. And Texas is coming on strong. This is more Texas of olden days as opposed to all these recent mishaps of Texas. So I think Texas will be close to Georgia. That will be a close race. Alabama third for just as what Adam said. It's the brand. And Kalen DeBoer, you look at Kalen DeBoer's record, 104-12, and put it with Alabama. What can go wrong? Then I think the media will have Ole Miss fourth, LSU fifth. This one could be close. I would say Missouri sixth and Tennessee seventh.
The only one I disagree with you on, John, I think they will flip Missouri and Tennessee. Missouri will have a small press corps there. They always do, so they don't get any of the hometown vote.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, but I agree with your top five, actually, of how the media will pick this. I think you nailed the order there. I think the media will go with Georgia, Texas, Alabama 3 because of the brand, Ole Miss 4, LSU 5, and then I think it'll be Tennessee number 6. So you two, I'm sort of right in line with the groupthink, I guess you could say, because I would have Tennessee about 6 on my ballot. You guys are a little more bullish on Tennessee. You'd have them number 4 on your ballots.
Well, and again, I do think there's a difference I think most of these preseason polls are picked by feel. We're not going through and picking every game. It's more of where did they finish last year? Who's their best player coming back? Maybe look at 1 or 2 key games. Where's the program usually at? Again, that would be where you would pick Alabama higher than maybe you would think on paper. But I think the end of the season will look at this, especially with not everybody is playing everybody. And I think this will be the first year in the SEC where schedules really dictate where people finish. Maybe not in line with what the product in the field is. Let me go back to Oklahoma as this example. I want to make sure people don't listen to this and say Adam said Tennessee's going to blow out Oklahoma. I think that's a toss-up game. But think about Oklahoma's overall record. Tell me how many of these are losses for Oklahoma. Tennessee at home, at Auburn. I think they split those. Let's say that's 1 loss. Texas, that's 2 losses. South Carolina at home, they win that. At Ole Miss, I think that's probably a loss. It's 3 losses. At Missouri, I think that's maybe a loss. That's 4. Alabama at home, that's a toss-up game. And then at LSU, I count 5 losses in there. You lose to Alabama, that's 6 losses. So I think Oklahoma has the talent of a top 25 team and could have a rude awakening in this new conference if they're, they win all their non-conference and they're 6-6 or 7-5 with what normally would be a top 3rd Big 12 team. I think by the end of the year, Texas is going to say, we belong and we always belonged. And Oklahoma is going to say, well, I don't really like this new conference.
I think Oklahoma is going to say, we'll be fine in this conference when we get a guy that can coach. If Adam's scenario is true, wow. The idea that Oklahoma is going to go to Missouri, I think when Oklahoma goes to Missouri, Missouri's just they're going to flash back to they'll have post-traumatic stress disorder when they flash back to those Big 12 days when they had to face those Oklahoma juggernauts. I think Oklahoma will go into Missouri and win. So I'm much higher on the Sooners. However, I don't have Oklahoma in my top 5. And it's almost as though the SEC, Blake and I talked about this on our SEC podcast, it's almost like the SEC is favoring Texas. And when you look at this schedule, what Texas got and then what Oklahoma got, it's a little bit better for Texas, I think. It's almost, they said, well, yeah, Oklahoma's going to feel the wrath of the SEC. Then Texas, that's our big market program, and we want them up there on the marquee. And if it's Texas and Georgia in that SEC championship game, we're fine with that. So, yeah.
I do think in the scheduling and the expanded conference now, it really matters as much, and I think this is in Tennessee's favor, what the bottom of your schedule looks like and the top, and not in as opposed to the middle. If you're playing a lot of teams in the middle, I think you're more susceptible to lose that third or fourth game that will take you out of the playoff hunt. You can afford to have a couple of losses and still get to the playoff. So you lose to Georgia, okay. You lose to Alabama, okay. And then you win your gimmies. Again, Tennessee has Mississippi State, Arkansas, Vanderbilt. I think that's more valuable to have those and not have as many of those mid-range teams that can trip you up on a bad day. The SEC, just like a lot of conferences, you have those non-conference games of teams you just bulldoze, and you do that because you want sort of a quote-unquote week off. And not to say that Arkansas or Mississippi State's a week off, but it's closer to that than a competitive game if you're a really good team. And so, Oklahoma is going to play Tennessee at home, and then they're going to play at Auburn. You could go 2-0, you could go 1-1, you could go 0-2 in those games. Those are very toss-up feeling games. And so I think Tennessee's initial schedule to get into the playoff, I think, is pretty favorable because they could lose a couple, play okay, and beat Mississippi State, Arkansas, Vanderbilt, and really only have to get up for 3 or 4 conference games and play well in those games to get to the playoff. Not to say that they're going to do that, but I think that's more manageable to get to 10-2 than the old way where you said, you can maybe lose one and that's it. You gotta play great every week.
All right. Well, we won't hear from Nico next week, but you will hear from John and Adam. You can find their coverage of SEC Media Days over at knoxnews.com, and we'll find out exactly where the media are picking Tennessee to finish in the 16-team conference this year. We think they're going to pick them about number 6, although John and Adam would have them a couple spots higher than that, and I'm following groupthink. No groupthink on the podcast, though. We appreciate you stopping by and listening to this edition of the Volunteer State.